everybody, I'm JJ Johnson. You're watching Reality Survival. So today what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk with you about gray man and the gray man concepts, the definition of gray man, and how, I guess how my opinion differs on what the gray man concept is in a post-collapse environment, how it differs from the post-collapse environment to what its traditional meaning was. So let me give you a little bit of background. Many of you guys, if you've watched the channel for a while, you probably know that my career has been primarily in counterintelligence, counterterrorism for the last 16 years. Before that, I was a SERE instructor. And so I have a little bit of information on what the gray man is, and I've been to lots of different training classes on surveillance, counter surveillance detection, all that kind of stuff. And that is where, at least it was where I'm aware of the gray man being taught in a classroom type setting. And the whole purpose of it was to give teaching gray man concepts to operators, people who were operating in hostile environments or in even kind of a military operations other than war environment, and people who were conducting surveillance. Okay, so it was both the people who were surveilling and the people who were trying to not be surveilled. Okay, and the traditional kind of definition, is a person who can blend into any scene or situation without standing out, while still hiding their skills and qualities. Okay, that's pretty close. That's the Urban Dictionary's definition of it. And I think that's what a lot of people apply to prepping and, without rule of law situations and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of videos out there. There's a lot of good ones that have a lot of great information in them. But I think that they miss some critical components for applying gray man concepts to an SHTF, post-apocalyptic world without rule of law, martial law, whatever the case may be, kind of situation, because it's different. It's different than that traditional meaning, in my opinion. So let me give you what I would say my definition is of gray man for a post-apocalyptic kind of situation. So I would say it is acting and dressing in a manner that affords you the greatest possible ability to move through an environment unimpeded. Now, I say it like that because you may not always want to blend in. That is kind of a key thing that people have taken, and they have focused on the blending in aspect of it. They've focused on what you wear, what kind of clothing, all this kind of stuff. And while that is important, it isn't the most important things you need to consider in a post-apocalyptic kind of situation. Okay? Sometimes it might be important to stand out and look like a hard target. So with that, we're going to cover a little bit more on why I think this, and I'm going to give you guys kind of some things to think about. These are just it's a thought exercise. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just something to get your wheels turning on how you may be able to apply this in different situations that you could come into in a post-collapse environment. So again, these are just ideas and stuff to think about. So the first thing is you have to determine, and if you guys see me looking down, I've got some notes down here because I wanted to make sure that I'm covering all this stuff, kind of like in the last video as well. But you want to make sure that you first observe and understand the situation that you're going to be operating in. Okay, gathering intelligence is really important because things are not always what they seem on the surface, and so I would say that observation from a distance is the first step, and you may likely want it to observe for several days. Now, this could be done in two ways, and throughout this whole kind of scenario that I'm going to be talking with you about today, I'm going to be kind of flipping back and forth between a couple of different settings. So the first setting is that you are somebody who has basically been, you're bugging in, and this is your town. Say it's kind of a rural sort of setting, town, and it could even be a more of an urban setting too. But and there is some sort of an occupation there. Whether that be the police and military in like a martial law setting, or it could even be a foreign military, or something like that. But that's the basic idea. You've decided to bug in. This is your town, and you belong here. But there's what we might call an enemy, holding the town. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing might be that you could be an insider or an outsider, but the town, it doesn't really have any sort of occupation, but it might have like roving violent gangs or a lot of opportunistic criminals or something like that. Maybe there's no established police force, but it's still just not a safe environment to be in. So your surveillance efforts, they can be done as an inside observer, where basically you lived there, and there was a disaster that happened, things started to develop, and from your home and your comfort areas that you're comfortable in operating, close to and around your house, you're going to try to do the best you can to gather intelligence, gather information, and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is you could be an outside observer. Maybe you bugged out and you needed to acquire some sort of supply or supplies or something like that, some kind of medicine, some kind of who knows what. Maybe you need something and you need to go into that town to go to the marketplace. So you would want to stop and conduct some surveillance and stuff ahead of time, so that you would understand what it is that you're going to walk into. Okay, so that's the first thing: gathering intelligence and information. Whatever your situation may be, you want to make sure that when you venture out from your safe zone, whatever that is, that you know what's going on. Okay. All right, so what this can do for you is gathering intelligence helps you to develop what's called an operational risk assessment. Now, an operational risk assessment, what you're doing is you're basically trying to determine all the factors that are out there and what all those risks are. What are the factors that could hinder your ability to operate in this environment? And then you look at the potential gain for going out and doing whatever activity it is that you have to do, and then you look at the potential risks that are involved, and you make an assessment of whether or not it's worth it to go ahead and take the risks so that you would get the end result. Okay? So you need to do that. You need to look at it, and you need to evaluate whether or not it's really important enough for you to do whatever activity it is you're thinking about doing. Some of the questions that you want to be able to answer before heading into this situation, I'm just going to just list off a bunch that just kind of came to the top of my head. There's definitely ones that you could add to this list, but again, it's just to get you thinking. Is it safe to travel? Obviously. Who is in control of the area? Who are you dealing with as a primary authority, or people who are controlling movement in the area? Because it could vary widely depending on your situation. Are there any authorities present, and then are they legitimate? Are they actually legitimate authorities? If there are authorities in the area, is there any travel requirements been enacted? Do you have to have an ID? Are you able to carry firearms? There could be a lot of things that happen. They may require you to go and if somebody was to shut down a town and wanted to contain that town, some kind of law enforcement entity or something like that, they may require you to have a pass identifying you, that you were there when the incident took place and all this kind of stuff. You just don't know, right? Are the authorities corrupt, or are they genuinely trying to help? Are people being arrested without cause? Are there any confiscations taking place? Is there any bans on anything? Stuff like that. What local gangs are forming? And if there are, what sort of things are they trying to steal? What are they trying to get a hold of? What's their primary business interest? Because they're going to have probably some focus or another. Many gangs do. Are women and children being targeted? You could very, very possible in a post-apocalyptic kind of situation where especially attractive women could be heavily targeted by a lot of different groups. Is there vehicle travel allowed? Is that practical to even do that? Can you take bicycles? Is there other forms of transportation happening? Are there any checkpoints? If so, who's controlling the checkpoints and what's required to get through those things? So you want to try to gather up as much information as possible to be able to kind of answer these questions. Now, the second thing that gathering this intelligence does for you is it helps you to establish your baseline. Now, your baseline is, it's going to essentially help you define what the typical appearance and behavior is for people in this area. Okay? Now, and it's going to help you answer questions kind of like, should you go out alone or should you be in a group? Should you be armed? If it's martial law, you probably don't want to be armed because that's probably not going to be allowed. Is there a curfew? How are these people dressed? Are they carrying backpacks and bags? What should your demeanor be? All those kinds of things. Okay. When you're going to try to establish your baseline, the first thing that you want to establish is who is the enemy. Who is the person or groups of people that are going to be the most imposition, who are going to impose upon your travel and your ability to conduct whatever activity it is that you want to conduct. You need to know who your opponent is, okay? And, we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So is your opponent or is your quote unquote enemy domestic police or military? Is it violent gangs? Is it a foreign occupation? Opportunistic criminals? Your response and the way that you develop how you operate in this environment is going to be drastically affected by who the opponent is. Okay. Another thing to consider is that when you're moving through any particular area, you need to know what your purpose for that travel is, and your appearance and your demeanor needs to be consistent with your cover story or with what you are going out to do. So, for example, if you're saying that you're going to a local marketplace to trade goods, then you need to make sure that you have some goods with you to trade with. Also, if you also need to make sure you have some way to carry those goods and to transport that item and stuff. It just needs to all be logical. You also need to make sure you're headed in the right direction to get to the marketplace and wherever that marketplace is. These are important factors, and it really goes into understanding the concepts of cover for action and cover for status, which are the things that build your whole cover story. Okay. Your cover for action, the thing that you're doing at the time, needs to be consistent with your cover for status, why you're there. Okay. So again, for example, and it's kind of similar to the last one, if you're confronted on the south side of town, you're headed east, but you tell somebody that you're headed to the marketplace, and that marketplace is located on the northwest side of town, that's going to raise flags with them because it's not consistent. The things are not meshing up. So you need to have this thought out ahead of time before you ever step out. And your cover stories could potentially have to change at different parts of the town, depending on where you're going, how far it is, what the mission is, the different areas that you're in. You may have to offer one explanation. When you move into another area, you may have to adjust that and offer another explanation. So you need to think about your route ahead of time and what the areas are that you're going to be going through and all that kind of stuff. Having your cover for action and your cover for status aligned and logical is going to be especially important when dealing with police and military. This is one of the key things that they're trained in, that they want to look for things that don't line up, things that don't make sense, and it just doesn't feel right. So you need to make sure that it's definitely well thought out. Now, appearance and blending in is important, and that is what it seems like most of the videos about gray man focus on is the appearance of what you wear. Your clothing should be in similar style and functionality to those in that area. Avoid bright colors, bright patterns, anything that could be determined offensive. Also, anything that has large wording or anything that makes it easily identifiable from a distance. So, for example, here in Cheyenne, if I'm wearing blue jeans, a flannel shirt, a Carhartt jacket, and a baseball cap or a stocking cap, I'm going to blend in. I'm going to look like a local, and nobody is going to have any reason to think that I'm not from here. But if I was wearing like khaki dress pants and a button-up shirt and boat shoes and or a suit or something like that, people are gonna be like, "What? Who's this guy?" So, these are all generalities. Of course, there are exceptions to all those rules, but you get the basic idea. Is blending in is important. And a lot of videos and a lot of people talk about the fact that military style clothing is going to draw attention to you, and you should never wear any military style clothing and all that kind of stuff. That is generally speaking true, and it would definitely be applicable to an environment where you have an occupation force of police or military or even a foreign occupation force. That would be applicable. Now, if the enemy is the opportunistic criminals or violent gangs, then you may want to appear more militaristic. You might want to wear camouflage, tactical gear, tactical clothing, whatever the case may be, because you're signaling to them that you're not going to be an easy target, and that you're not going to go down without a fight. Chances are they're going to overlook you, let you go by your way, because they are going to be interested in the more easy targets. Okay? Now, again, there's just a ton of variables in this, and you have to use a little bit of common sense when applying it, because I can't in these kind of videos talk about every different kind of situation, but I think hopefully you get the point on that. Okay. Now, while appearance is important, the most important thing is your demeanor. Okay, demeanor is critically important, and it will make you stand out. If your demeanor is off in the wrong situations, it will make you stand out even more than whatever your clothing is. All right, and this is something that is really, really important to understand. If your enemy is a police or military force or anything like that, it's going to be really important to appear to be more relaxed, more comfortable in your environment, and to look like you know where everything is and you know who all the people are. It's going to be important for you to be interacting with the other local people like you know them, because socialization is one of the key factors for looking for someone who doesn't belong. When guards are standing up looking over a crowd and all that kind of stuff, and people are turning their heads and talking and all this kind of stuff, and you see one person that just kind of has his head down, he's not talking to anybody, that's the guy I want to talk to. So, socialization and looking like you belong in that kind of environment is extremely important. The bad thing is it's one of the hardest things to fake, because if you don't know these people, it's difficult to strike up conversations with them and all that kind of stuff without standing out. So, think about that. Okay, now, if again on the flip side of that coin, if the enemy is violent gangs, opportunistic criminals, all that kind of stuff, you may want to go ahead and project a very militaristic, I'm a badass sort of persona. You may want to look and play the part of somebody who is not a victim. Okay, keep your head up, keep it on a swivel, chest out, be kind of abrupt and confident. Almost to the point where you look like you're looking for trouble. You want to be somebody who is not to be messed with. The problem is in this is if you apply the traditional mindset of a gray man, and to where you're kind of just trying to be a more meek and humble person, and you don't want any trouble. You're just kind of moving through the area. You know, usually it's pictured as, you know, alone and those kind of things. That may not be the best way to go, because you're presenting yourself as a target to criminals. You know, especially if you're a smaller person and that kind of thing, then you're going to be looked at as a target. It may be much better for you to have 2 or 3 friends. You guys are all geared up, and, you know, that kind of thing, if the environment permits it, and, you know, you look like you run the place. You know, so it really depends on the situation. You got to think about that. So the other thing that I wanted to cover real quick is, and we're almost to the finish here. The other thing is that a lot of people, when they talk about gray man concepts and movement and post-apocalyptic environment stuff, they say you want to avoid any kind of establishing patterns. Okay, they always say, you know, never establish any patterns, and I don't think that this is necessarily true, depending on your circumstances. If you're in a town that has an occupying force of military folks or anything like that, establishing patterns can be one of the biggest keys to giving you freedom of movement and access throughout the area, throughout the operating area. The soldiers, you know, people who are on guard and all that kind of stuff, when they get used to seeing you go certain places at certain times and on certain days, and you come and go without any issue, they will become complacent and used to your presence. Well, that then gives you the opportunity to move through there, and, you know, without causing any issues. So that's good, because then they're not paying attention to you. If they see you and they're like, oh yeah, that's JJ, he's going over to the whatever, you know, the marketplace, and, you know, he'll come back here in a little while and it's not any big deal. Then they're not going to pay any attention, because they've seen you do it 20 times or whatever. Now, between the point when you're out of their sight, whether or not you actually go to the marketplace, well, maybe you're going somewhere else to do something else, and it gives you that flexibility. Let's see. On the other hand, if you're in an environment where it's violent gangs and opportunistic criminals, and, you know, or just an unknown environment, you don't know what's going on, then doing everything that you can to avoid any kind of patterns, lifestyle patterns, you know, that is going to be good. You want to vary your routes, vary your times, vary your schedules as much as possible. So applying some of these thoughts and some of these concepts is hopefully it'll help you think a little bit differently about the gray man concept, because I think it gets painted into one picture because of its history and how it was taught in classroom environments, where it's only focused on blending in. You gotta blend in. But just blending in and looking, you know, like somebody who's not a threat and all that kind of stuff in a post-apocalyptic environment could end up getting killed. So that's kind of the whole gist of all this stuff. Hopefully it makes sense. If you guys think that I have overlooked anything or have any questions about this or anything like that, you know, feel free to stick them in the comments below. If you like these kind of videos, then please click the subscribe button as well. I think it's right down there. When you do, or if you want to subscribe, or if you want to get my videos on a regular basis, also click the little bell icon down there, because what that'll do is that'll tell Google to send you an email to your account that a video has been uploaded. So that'll help, you know, on a regular basis. Anyway, guys, as always, I definitely appreciate it when you click the thumbs up button, when you share it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, or Google+. And don't forget to live the 6 Ps. Prior preparation prevents poor performance. Stay safe, guys.